Welcome to this 14 Fish Facebook Live on passing the AKT exam. This is mainly for people who are sitting the exam, which is literally just around the corner. But for those of you who are sitting later in the year, we're very, very happy to talk about exam technique and answer your questions live. So I thought I would just set the scene a wee bit and talk about really focusing your revision, because every point in the AKT exam is important. My name is Mark Coombe and I've helped thousands of trainees through the AKT exam, and I hope I'm going to be able to give you a few tips tonight that will help you along the way. I'm going to divide my advice really up into two sections, and that's what to revise now, so in the next few days, to maximize your score, but also looking at exam technique, what to do the few days before the exam and what to do on the actual day itself. So what would I revise now if I had just a few days to go before the exam? I would probably look at all of the titles of the 14 Fish videos in the library and work out the ones that I found hardest. So do you find HRT or headache hard? And in that case, I would watch those videos again and make some notes of things that I find difficult to remember. I'd probably look through the first 5 chapters of the BNF and I would pick topics that I felt least confident in. And don't forget that in general practice, common things are common. So in the exam, you're going to be asked about common things like diabetes and asthma. Do you know the new asthma guidance? The chances of that coming up, I would have thought, is pretty high. The other thing not to forget is to look at the RCGP's exam website, which has its problems at times. But looking at the feedback from the last 3 exams, you can pick areas in those in which you feel least confident. I printed those out earlier in the day, and so covering the last 12 months, the things that came out in the exam, we've noticed room for improvement in 2 out of the past 3 settings of the AKT in the GP and the wider professional environment. And this is a large area, including topics such as consent, confidentiality, death certification, and others. A lot of these feedback points on the RCGP website have links, so don't forget to click on the link and have a look at some of it, or look it up. So what about care of children and young people? And this covers such areas as child development, starting with what's normal and what is abnormal. You can't recognize abnormal without knowing normal, as well as the diagnosis of acute and serious illnesses and prescribing in children. Women's health is a large area with difficulties for candidates arising in areas such as contraception, HRT, and pregnancy care. What about care of people with mental health problems? This relates in particular to medicines management issues, such as appropriate drug prescribing and monitoring. The thing that's easy to put pictures, so if we're going to use pictures in the exam, think to yourself what would be easy to have there. And so retinas are a good one. And so as the feedback from the last few exams says, eye emergencies and things that aren't well recognized by candidates. And you may think that's a bit odd, because in the room that I practice in my surgery, it's got the light so bright it's very difficult to get a good look at someone's fundi. But I think it's perfectly reasonable for us to test it in the exam. So you may see some pictures of eyes. If you hate eyes, or you went on holiday during your eye attachment when you were a student, it's probably a good idea to get a book with some pictures in it. Just make sure that you know the basics. What does a diabetic eye look like? What does a hypertensive eye look like? Central retinal and central venous thrombosis and clots, sudden loss of vision, acute red eye, all that sort of stuff. Think about people with metabolic problems. Diabetes care encompasses a wide range of topics, and certain areas can cause difficulty. So if you don't know your diabetes, get into the front of the BNF and learn the pathways, learn the stepwise management. And once again, as I said, stepwise management about asthma. So care of people with skin problems, this includes both diagnosis and management. And in my video on eczema and on psoriasis, I talk about fingertip units, and that's really easy for us to ask questions on. So where do we go to now? What about, so you've thought about your clinical areas. You might be doing the BNF, you might well be doing our 14 Fish library module, you might be looking at the stuff that I was just reading off the RCGP website, but you mustn't forget practice admin and stats. And there are certain things in practice admin that are a given that are going to come up, and that would be stuff like the DVLA at a glance. Our video on the 14 Fish library covers a number of different areas, but quite superficially because it is quite a large topic. But there is some stuff on there which will definitely increase your score. Think about certification, think about business aspects. It's been quite popular recently to look at some of the sort of graphs and things that we're seeing as GPs in general practice. So stuff we're getting from our CCG about performance, prescribing of the different tables of why people prescribe differently for antibiotics, say, in one practice to another, and how you might go about investigating that. Controlled drugs is an absolute must. That's going to be in the exam. You need to know that for both the AKT and the CSN. You need to know drug dosage and what the equivalent dosage of opiates really is. What other things might come up? Well, if you haven't got access to the library and you've got a library still in your practice, you might well be able to find Keith Palmer's book. He's nothing to do with us, but actually has done some really good things. And practice admin is covered very well in chapters 3, 5, 6, 7, and 8. I've said about statistics, and statistics are going to come up. They're things that I find difficult. I would do it just before the exam and make sure that I know the formula. And in fact, that's even the sort of thing I would do the night before the exam. Once again, if you haven't got access to our statistics video, then the one that I would use is get a book that's thin and that you can read quickly. I particularly like Kirkwood and Stone. They did Essential Medical Statistics. And equally, Keith Palmer's book, that's in chapter 4 of Keith Palmer's book. Let's move on now to talk about exam technique. And there are some fundamentals about the exam that if you don't get right, you will fail. And there's no doubt you need to do the Pearson VUE online tutorial. And it will just show you the sort of screen to expect, what it looks like, and you know, just the basics of the practicality of what you're going to be doing during your exam. You need to know where your test centre is. And if you've not been before, in the next few days, you need to go there and you need to find out how long it takes. And you need to find out where you can park and whether you've got the right change. I know this sounds stupid, but I've seen lots and lots of candidates running down the street, dripping with sweat. And that doesn't help how you perform in your first few questions and probably your first 10 questions. And that might be enough for you to pass or fail the exam. So make sure that you know where you're going and how to get there. As I said, for me, once I know where I'm going, that makes me feel a bit better. So the night before the exam, I'd do my stats formula and I would talk to people that make me feel positive. This is an exam where you've got to show that you're a professional, that you're ready for independent practice. And so you've got to have at least some belief in yourself. So talk to people who make you feel good about yourself, at least give you a bit more confidence. And hopefully you get some of that confidence from your trainer. Night before, and probably a couple of nights before, make sure that you go to bed in time. I used to share a flat when I was a medical student with lots of people that used to stay up taking massive amounts of caffeine the night before the exam, and it just is a complete disaster. Even if you don't sleep, just go to bed and rest. So just relax and think to yourself, well, at least I'm lying still and I'm relaxing, and you'll probably find that you drop off anyway. So when you wake up in the morning, you know where you're going. Make sure that you have something to eat. Make sure that you do anything that's lucky for you. Some people have lucky rituals. Don't worry about that. Get on with it. Anything that helps make that 1 point difference. When you get to the exam centre, you're there in plenty of time. You're in the right frame of mind. And you need to make sure that you've already got with you your correct ID, some drinks, and some sugary snacks or some savoury snacks, depending what's your thing. I've already told you not to drink too much coffee. That's the person in the Pearson VUE trap who's shaking up and down and they don't know where to start and they keep going off track. So whatever you do, don't overdo it on the coffee. You must answer every question on the AKT exam. If you don't and you leave 10 at the end, it's absolute exam suicide. So make sure that you answer all of the questions as you go along. Don't get stuck on any questions. I struggle with questions with a lot of writing or questions with formula. I need to use formula. So I would just guess those. And if you guess them with the same number or same letter, I tend to put C. So guess the same letter. So I'm not panicking and thinking, oh, I might have a little go at this. I'm just going to press C. And then I'm going to put it for review. And I don't want you to review more than about 20 questions, because otherwise you go back and change the same number right as wrong, so you may as well not bother. So whatever you do, make sure you get to the end. One other thing that happens to some people in the exam is they suddenly believe that they don't know any medicine whatsoever. And so there was a question a few years ago asking about the first line management of menorrhagia. And one of the options in the boxes was nonoxynil 9. Now, I don't know if you know what nonoxynil 9 is. I hope you don't. But nonoxynil 9 is a spermicidal gel, and as far as I'm aware, is not fantastically effective in the management of menorrhagia. So if you see it in the box, a lot of people suddenly thought, oh, I don't know what that is. I'll definitely put it in. That'll make, that's bound to be the question. If you don't know it, then almost certainly you don't know it, and it's not the answer, because you've been in medicine for some years now. And so, you know, don't make suicidal decisions when you're making choices for the exam questions. You'll know about the review procedure. If not, I think it is there on the Pearson VUE site. But at the top left-hand side of each question is review, and you should tick only those few that you're guessing. And then when you get to the end, just look at those. Don't go through all of your answers. So the basic rule of thumb is you look at a question, by and large, you'll know it's one of two, and you want to make your best guess. And by and large, you'll get that right. If you think you know, but you're not 100% sure, then obviously guess again. And you shouldn't be reviewing these either. If you vaguely know it, then you vaguely think, I think it might be E, then guess it and don't review that either. You are only reviewing at the end of the paper the questions you know the answer to, but it's just not coming straight to mind. So if you don't know the answer, and you'll never know the answer, guess and don't review that either, because once again it's bad for morale, and it's not going to improve your score. So, you know, this is an exam, and you know it's not fun. Nobody enjoys taking exams, and if you do, you're vaguely psychopathic. And so don't get tied up with it. You've got to think to yourself, you're not going to enjoy it, but I'm just going to give it my best shot. You need to focus over the next few days if you're doing the exam this time, and if not, then let's talk about broader ways of preparing for the AKT afterwards. But if you do have any questions, please feel free to ask. And I think there's been quite a few popping up just on the questions box. And so one of the first questions was, it was about technicalities. One of the things that I say a lot is about not just doing questions. And a lot of candidates say to me, when they're preparing for the exam, they just go on one of these question banks. By and large, the question banks are not written by GPs, and they're certainly not written by AKT examiners. And so unless you use those as a method of accessing wider aspects of that topic, then you're going to struggle, because you'll do loads and loads of questions and actually won't learn a great deal. So you need to learn some clinical medicine to start. It was interesting, statistically, in the last exam in January, then the commonest area of failure out of the 3 topic areas, so that's clinical, practice admin and statistics, was actually clinical, and that's the first time for some time. So we need to make sure that we know some medical stuff before we go into the exam. Somebody's asked a question about guessing or leaving blank, and definitely do not leave any question blank, no matter what. There's certainly no blackballing. So if you gave an answer which was dangerous, then it still wouldn't count against you. So do make sure that you answer it. There's a question just come in about how many of the questions are about statistics. Well, the AKT exam is like a sort of recipe. So there's 80% are clinical, and 10% are practice admin, and 10% are statistics. So, you know, in a 200 question paper, you know, it's going to be 20 questions for each of those. There's a thing about someone's asked me a question about what is the commonest cause of failure, and the commonest cause of failure, in my view, is just doing questions. I think the other common causes are not finishing the exam, getting stuck on questions, and ending up having to guess a whole load at the end. I think that's a disaster. Another cause of failures is just not feeling well prepared. If you're not sitting the exam in a few days' time and you're sitting later on in the year, you need to give yourself at least 3 months, and I would say preferably a bit longer, and that way you can learn stuff properly. And particularly if you do our package, then that's what we would encourage you to do. So let's have a little look about any other questions. It's good to see some of my friends are out there being abusive, which is always kind. Where are we? Okay, so hopefully that's answered most of your questions. We're gonna, if this is of any value to anybody on the planet at all, then please feel free to make contact. Come on our website and go through contacting us. We'll certainly answer questions regularly over the next few days, and certainly over the next few months while you're preparing for your AKT. You know, as I say, it's not a trick. The AKT is there as a test of knowledge in medicine, and are you fit to practice as an independent practitioner? And so if you work hard enough, you will pass the AKT. It's not there to trip you up. So for all of you out there sitting the exam in the next few days, really, really good luck, and hope to see the rest of you on 14 Fish website. Sorry, there's one more question coming. Do you want to read that out for me, Liz?
Yeah, so there's 2 questions here. One says, with pharmacological, I can't say it. Which parts of the BNF should be read?
Okay, so when you're looking at the BNF, really, really important to look at the general rules, which are in the first chapter, and then really important in the BNF to look at just the big topic areas, so cardiovascular, respiratory, and not really looking at the drugs on an individual basis. We're not really going to ask you anything about doses and things like that. It's much more the principles, and which would be first in the management of hypertension, for example. Would it be calcium channel blockers, or would it be ACE inhibitors? And obviously that's dependent on age.
And Nikolaika, I think that's how you say your name, asks, how long do you recommend for each question?
Okay, my view is that you need to give yourself at least half an hour at the end. So at the moment there's 3 hours and 10 minutes. So if you divide, if you take 30 minutes off 3 hours and 10 minutes and then divide it amongst your questions, it's sort of under a minute, isn't it, a question? So you've got to get a move on. One of the few good things about practicing questions is to get your speed up, and that's the only reason that I would use lots of practice questions.
We've got another question. Do you recommend studying in groups for the AKT or on your own?
Yeah, so there's very little evidence about anything to do with passing the AKT. There are only a few things. There's now emerging evidence, certainly on the first 2 darts, that our package works and the pass rate increases. There's no doubt that working in groups makes a difference. And so if you can get in a group, even if it's on using our online forum or setting up an email group, then that would be absolutely great. And you can share out the workload. So if you were in a group and you're wondering, where do I start? The first thing I'd do is give yourselves each a chapter of the BNF and summarize it, and then you bring it back and present it to each other. And that's not the end of it. That should then stimulate each individual to go away and look up areas that they find difficult, or that they have difficulty with, that they would then go on and study in greater depth. We all have blind spots. You know, when you meet somebody in the supermarket and you just can't remember their name, and yet if you're really good at names, there's always this sort of stumbling block. And we have that in medicine, and you should by now start beginning to know what your areas, your blind spots are. And in those cases, jot those down and make sure that those are the things that you're looking at over the next few days.
So I've got 2 questions from Rebecca. The first one is, for drug monitoring, which drugs should they be aware of?
Okay, there was a really good paper published in the BMJ, I think it was last year, and it talked about the top 20 dangers to patients. And so I would have thought, if I were you, and there are things, there are things like warfarin, methotrexate. I would look at that top 20 list. Lithium, the sort of stuff. They're either going to be things that we use a lot, like warfarin, and therefore there's a high proportion or a high number of people that are going to be harmed by it, or it's going to be something where you make one mistake, an opiate, for example, that it causes a catastrophic effect. So have a look at that sort of group.
She also asks, what types of studies should we be familiar with, i.e. cohort, cross-sectional?
Yeah, I think you should understand what they all mean and where they are in the hierarchy of data. So, what is the best study and what sort of, just because if you're looking at a study in a journal, and we don't do it that much in general practice in all honesty, but if you're looking at a study, is it a good quality study? And what does it mean? And so have an idea of what they all mean, and then there are certain things in studies that are easy to ask questions on, and they are things like scattergrams, funnel plots, forest plots, and so you should be able to have a basic interpretation of that sort of study. But don't get too tied down with studies. You're only going to get 1, possibly 2 questions on that in the stats section.
So I've got a question from Alexander. It's a bit specific to 14 fish. So he's just said, is the 14 fish the most reliable resource to use in terms of likeness to the actual AKT, or should he use it as a guide? And will topics continue to be added to the resource?
Yeah. So what? I'm the person who's set up the 14 fish past the AKT package, and it's based around 20 years of experience of getting candidates through the exam. And we know from the original data of our first 60 or 70 candidates that went through, there is no doubt that the 14 fish package increases everybody's score. So everybody went on it, their score went up, and the vast majority of those people who went on it, their score went up enough to get them over the pass mark. If you start at a relatively low level, and some people have taken the AKT before, then you're going to need to do more work. So if you're in the 50s, you're going to need to get your numbers up to really the late 60s and early 70s. And we have seen that. We've had a couple of amazing results from the AKT package where people have gone from 55 to 80, which is just a massive leap, and over a relatively short period of time. Our AKT questions are meant to be AKT-like, and they're meant to cover the depth and strength of AKT, the sort of things you're going to get in the exam, but they really are. I'm really encouraging you not to do loads and loads of questions, but just to use them as a guide to go on to then guide your revision as to how you overall prepare.
So I've got another question coming via Messenger. They've just put too many drug side effects to learn. Do you have any advice for this?
Yeah, drug side effects don't come up that much in the AKT. You've got to remember when you talk to people, they only remember the questions they really hated. The vast majority of questions on the AKT are, here is a scenario. So, a young, fit, thin man goes swimming every day, and in the middle of his vigorous swimming activity, he starts to get shortness of breath and pain in his chest. So they're going to be common scenarios with a single diagnosis at the end of it. But you will hear that people say, oh, there was a funnel plot, or they're asking about side effects. It really isn't that common. You can't learn the side effects of every drug, and the vast majority of drugs that have been on the market have all got dizziness, nausea, vomiting, feeling unwell. So I really wouldn't spend any time on drug side effects unless they are very, very particular to that sort of drug. So, for example, in carbimazole about reducing immunity.
Well, no new questions at the moment, but if people do want to ask questions, please do just write in the comments and we'll read them out. There's lots of thank yous, so people are liking your advice, which is good.
Well, thank you very much.
Unfortunately, I'm not taking the AKT, so I can't ask any questions either. Yeah.
Okay, well, as I say, please do keep in touch. If you want to go through contacting us at 14 Fish, that's absolutely fine. Even if you're not a member, we're very happy to give you some advice. And as I say, really just try and make the most out of those last few days. Or actually, if you've got plenty of time until your exam, just plan your revision and it will make your life a hell of a lot easier.
Someone's just asked, will there be any more of these sessions?
If people like them, I would be delighted to do more sessions and perhaps even focus on specific areas of the AKT or even specific clinical areas. So yeah, if we get some reasonable feedback and people don't hate it, we'll be delighted to do it.
Someone has just said, would you mind just not doing the whole beginning again, but could you just recap maybe the most important bits? Because there's a few more people now than there was at the beginning.
Okay, so just a quick recap. What I've done tonight is just try and divide your revision over the next few days into clinical and exam technique. And in clinical, I would divide that up into the actual clinical content. So I'm talking about diabetes and asthma. And what you need to do is think that common things are common. So look at stuff that you find difficult. I find diabetes very difficult. I find eyes very difficult. So I would be concentrating on those areas and looking them up in the BNF and looking them up on the library or looking them up on something even as simple as patient.co.uk. So that's the clinical bit. You need to think about practice admin because there's always stuff in there that you can't remember, like the DVLA. How long is it after you've had a heart attack that you can drive again? What's the rules about HGVs and diabetes? So you've got to look at practice admin. And there are, I mentioned a bit earlier, a couple of chapters in various books and equally what we provided. And also in the feedback from the last exams, practice admin was covered and some quite interesting stuff about consent and confidentiality. So have a look at those. The other area is stats. You need to have a basic understanding of stats and then the night before learn your formula. And so that was the question content. And then the exam tips. My top tip is make sure that you finish. Whatever you do, make sure that you finish. Don't get stuck on questions. If you find the questions difficult like me with questions with lots of working out or questions with lots of writing, so there seems to be quite a big stem at the beginning of your question, then mark them as answer C, put review in the top left-hand side, and then come back to them at the end. And once you've finished the exam and you've reviewed the ones that you like, the ones that you needed to review, then stop. Don't keep going back. There are some very negative reviewers and they go back and change lots of right questions for wrong. So once it's done and you've done the way that I've described, then you're as good as you can be and hopefully in with a pass.
Someone's asked, who is 14 Fish? Can you give a brief overview of what 14 Fish are? Okay, so
I joined 14 Fish about 14 months ago. It's a young company run by a couple of young IT experts, and they've been essentially running a site for appraisal and revalidation. And I found them because I was looking for a site that did appraisal and revalidation really well, but didn't make it complicated and made it easy to join in. And so that's when I joined 14 Fish as a user about 4 years ago. But I was looking at their site and thought that actually what we could do is add in some education as well. And so over the last 18 months, between the group, then that's what we've done is set up our library, our AKT package, and we're also going to set up some other packages. So passing the CSA package is about 80% done. We're going to do a minor surgery package, just to make the learning as easy as possible. And if you do the learning, you can feed it straight into your learning diary.
And someone's asked, how often do we update the library?
Okay, so the library, as soon as there's a new guidance, so for example, asthma changed, As soon as there's a new guidance, we'll do our best within the week or so to update the guidance. We're also adding to the library at the moment. So we add between 2 and 3 hot topics. So as we get feedback from the AKT, or if we get feedback politically, so for example, this week is Ovarian Cancer Month. So we did a module on ovarian cancer. Last month was Prostatic Cancer Month, or Prostatic Cancer Awareness Month. So we added that. There was a lot of feedback from the exam about the routine immunisation schedule, and so we put that on. So we're going to continually be topping it up, and with each new module comes a new batch of questions as well.
Okay, so this video, if you have missed it or if you've just come in, this video is going to be put up onto Facebook for you to rewatch whenever you are free to watch it. It's been quite good. We've had over 30 people viewing it on and off, so we will probably do another one, and we'll let you know via the Facebook page. Our Twitter is at 14fish, and our Instagram's at 14fish as well. It'll be advertised there as soon as we have scheduled a new Facebook Live date. Are there any questions before Mark goes and has a well-deserved break?
I managed to do all that sort of end of the thing without moving my mouth and in a much higher voice, which I thought was quite clever.
Maybe I should say hi so it's not so weird. Hi!
So that's Liz, who also is in 14fish.
Okay, I think we will call it a night. Thank you everybody who asked questions, and see you again soon.
And good luck. Bye.